Okay, so what we're going to be doing today, because one of the most important things to live in today's world is that we need a computer. We either need a cell phone that has internet access, or an iPad, or an Android tablet, or a computer. And so, to ensure that everyone has access to the same device and it's an affordable device, so you're not having to spend $1,000 for an iPad, what we're going to do is we're going to build what's called a Raspberry Pi. And a Raspberry Pi is a very cheap and affordable computer, and it runs an operating system, which you're going to learn all of these things that we're talking about as we go through this course. But it runs an operating system called Linux. And Linux is a free program, and it's a free operating system. And so what that means is that a bunch of people get together every day to work on this program, this operating system that runs this computer. They work on it for free every night when they get home from work, and some of them do it all day. And so they add programs and things to this operating system, and we're going to load it onto this piece of hardware that we're about to take a look at. So we're going to have a computer. And one of the things that you have to have if you're going to use a computer is you got to have a keyboard. You got to have some way to type into the computer. We have to have a monitor because we need to be able to see what the computer is thinking or what it wants us to do. And we need a mouse so that we can move the cursor around and be able to do things with the mouse. And so what we have here is we have a Raspberry Pi 4, and they've got multiple versions of these, and you can even get the lower versions, and they'll still work. So if you can't get a Raspberry Pi 4, then you can get a Raspberry Pi 3 or a 2. Most of them are going to do what you want to do, but we're going to try to get a Raspberry Pi 4. Now this computer is only $35. So you can get this computer for very cheap, but you'll notice that this doesn't look like a normal computer. It actually is the inside of a computer. So when you buy an iPad, for example, it has something very similar to this that is inside the iPad that you're actually using to display on the screen and to do your touch and all of that stuff. This is, you can think of it as a replica or a duplicate of something that would be inside of a real computer. This is a real computer. The downside to this computer, though, is that it's not as fast as something that you would have in, say, a MacBook Pro or some other Apple computer or a Windows computer. So it's not a fast computer, but we're only going to be using this to search on the internet, to watch some training videos, to learn how to type. And so this computer is perfectly okay for most of the things that we're going to be doing in the lesson. And when we get to the point where we're actually doing more advanced lessons, like, for example, doing high-end video processing, what we'll do is we'll take the information off of our individual computer and we'll copy it to a bigger computer where we'll actually go in and process that video. So this is the computer. Now, if anybody knows anything about a computer, you know it has a hard drive in it that stores all of your information. And in this computer, the hard drive is this little bitty card that we actually use inside of a camera. So the hard drive that we're using, and you'll notice that on the back of this, and I'll put it in another screen over here, but in the back of this, you actually take this card and you slide it right into the computer, and it goes in just like that. And so the hard drive goes into the back of the computer, and you have to load this. So someone is going to have to actually get another computer to load this, and we'll do a separate video on that. Right now, you're already going to have a card. It's already going to have the operating system on it and be ready to go. So all you've got to do is slide that chip inside of the computer down here on the bottom. Now, if we take a look at the top, we have USB ports that show up over here. And again, I'll put it over here so we can see it. So we've got USB ports we got 4 USB ports, and you'll notice that some of them are blue and some of them are not. And the reason is because the blue ones are faster than the ones that aren't blue. And so depending on what you're plugging into it, you can use either the fast or the slower card or ports. This is an Ethernet port, and you'll learn about Ethernet in a later video, but right now just this big port here looks kind of like a telephone plug-in, which most of you probably don't even know what that is, but we're going to learn about this port in a later video. Right now we are only interested in these USB 2 and USB 3 ports. Now if we take a look at the other side of this, we have some other ports over here. You'll notice that we've got these two ports that look very similar, and then we've got an audio port. This is where you would plug in your headset, and then we have a power port, which is a USB-C port. And so when we get ready to plug this thing in, we're actually going to use the USB-C port to power the computer. And so what we're going to do right now is I'm going to walk through some of the cables that we actually have that we're going to be plugging into this computer to build the computer up. And we've also got a monitor that we're going to be using to power this. So for less than $100, we can actually get a computer, and we've got a monitor that is over here. And so we've got a 7-inch monitor, we've got a computer, we've got a keyboard back here that we're going to be using. And so what we're going to do is, after I give a really quick lesson here to Jacob, we're going to watch Jacob actually build this computer and see if he can actually get it to work. And so right now what we have is we've got these two ports that look kind of alike. These are what's called HDMI, and what they are graphic ports. So these are the ports that we're going to be plugging in the cables that are going to go to the monitor. This, as I said a minute ago, is a USB-C port, and we're using that for our power. So we have power and we have two video. That means we can plug two monitors into this computer and be able to display graphics on both of them at the same time if we want to. In this video we're only going to be using one monitor, but we have two ports. So we have our hard drive plugged in here, that's down here in the bottom, and then we're going to be plugging in these two graphics ports and the power port. Now if we look at cables, you'll notice that this cable has a kind of a flat side on one side, and it's curved on the other, and it's really thin, and it's got some little clips up here on the top that lock it into place in the computer. So this is a micro USB cable. This is not a USB-C cable, it's just a micro USB, but you'll notice on the other end is a USB. And so we're going to use this to power our monitor. So we're going to take the USB plug, we're going to plug it into the port on the computer for our USB 2, which again, the USB 2 are the ones that are not colored blue. And then we're going to plug this other end of this cable into our graphics card. Now this is, our graphics monitor. So this is our monitor that we're going to be using, and it's got a piece of film over it to protect the screen right now, so that's why it looks a little rough. But this is our monitor, and if we flip this over to the back, you'll notice that it has some ports on it as well. You have a micro USB, which it uses for power, and then you have another HDMI cable that we're using to display the graphics. Now notice that this HDMI cable, or the port, is actually a lot bigger than the HDMI port that I was showing you here on the computer. And so we're going to need a special cable to go from this mini HDMI port to a regular size HDMI port. And we happen to have a cable that will fit these. But one of the things that you should be paying attention to right now is we have a big HDMI cable, a little HDMI cable, a USB-C cable that we haven't actually looked at yet, and then we have USB ports that we're going to be plugging in here. And so all of these cable ends are different, and so you can use that fact to try to figure out where to plug everything in, because most of these cables are only going to plug into one place. And so The next thing that we want to look at is our power cable. And our power cable is what's called a USB-C cable. Now this is a new style cable, and you'll notice that it's round. It's flat on both sides, and then it's round on the edges. You don't have those locking feet that were on that other the micro USB cable, and so it's a very smooth, very rounded, symmetric cable, and that is what we're going to be using for our power cable. And again, there's only one place that this will plug into the computer, so we have to pay attention to what we're doing so we know where to plug that in. Now, another thing that we have here is we have a mouse. We have to have a mouse, and in our case we have a USB mouse, and this USB mouse has a USB port or a plug that we're going to plug into the computer that talks to the mouse. And so we're going to use this plug to talk to the mouse to give us mouse access inside of the Linux when we boot it up. And so you'll notice that when we plug this into the computer, we're going to be plugging it again into the USB 2, because the mouse and the display, the power for the display, don't need a lot of speed, and so we're not going to waste our speedy ports, the fast ports, to power the monitor or the mouse. And so what we're going to do is and also lastly, we have a keyboard. Now this keyboard does have what's called Bluetooth, but we're not going to learn about Bluetooth yet. But you'll notice that this keyboard has a USB-C, so it's that smooth round cable. It has a USB-C port on the back of it, and then on the other end of it is going to be a USB cable. And so when we get to that particular cable, you'll notice that the other end of it is a regular USB cable. So because we only have 4 ports on our computer, we're going to end up using one of the fast ports for the keyboard. It doesn't need a fast port, but we don't have an option since we only have 4 ports here. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to stop the video and swap places with Jacob, and we're going to see if Jacob was paying attention and whether he can actually successfully power this computer up and make it boot into the Linux operating system. Okay, so now we're going to see how much Jacob was paying attention. So Jacob, we're going to watch you put this whole thing together and power up the computer.
Okay. So how would I start off?
So we got to find the cables that fit into all the individual holes so that we can power the thing up. So each cable only fits one place, so just figure out where they all go.
So that's gonna...
So looking at that cable, that is what we were calling a micro USB cable. So this cable is a little hard to see on the video, but that cable is a special cable. It only goes into one spot, and it happens to go into the only place that we have a micro USB connector, which we're looking at, but Jacob has not found yet.
It's right there.
Is it? Don't. Now when we're playing with these cables to find the right hole, we don't want to push too hard, because if you get the wrong hole, we don't want to. Alright, so it don't fit that hole. And you only have 2 things to look at. So we have a computer and a monitor. So look at the monitor and see if you can find a port on the monitor. That's the computer.
And then this is the stuff the monitor?
No, the monitor is sitting right here. So this is the computer, that's the monitor. So Jacob was not paying attention. So there's only 2 places to plug it. And now there's a trick between the monitor cable on a micro USB, and a USB-C. The USB-C you can plug either direction, but a micro USB will only go in one way. So you have to figure out which way it goes. And if you look at the cable and look at the end of the port, you can see where the flat face is, and you're going to push it until it actually snaps into place. Alright, so now we have the power portion of the monitor plugged in, And so let's go ahead and plug the other end of that cable into where it goes on the computer itself. Because in this situation, we're actually going to power the computer off, the monitor off of the computer. So we're plugging that into the USB port on the computer. And again, look at the port because it'll only go in one way. Look at, if it don't go in the way you're pushing it, flip the cable over and try to put it in the other way.
So it won't go. Maybe I have to.
Okay. So now what we have is Jacob has successfully plugged the monitor into the computer for power. So now let's grab another one of those cables off of the counter and let's figure out where it's going to go. And we want to wait and plug the power cable for the computer in last. So we're not going to plug that power cable in until we get everything else plugged in. So now that we got the cables untangled, now we're going to let Jacob figure out where this cable goes. So what does this cable look like on the end? So that is, and if you look at the other end of that cable, that's a pretty long cable that he's having to fight with here. We don't really need a cable that long. But if you look at the end, it looks kind of like a USB cable, doesn't it? It's kind of got that look to it, but it's not. It's got a funky end to it. And if you look at the difference between a USB cable, it's square. But if you look at an HDMI cable on the monitor, it's got a flat spot on the top, but it's kind of rounded around the bottom edge. And so one end of that is going to go into the monitor, into the HDMI port, and then we're going to plug the other end into the computer.
Kind of looks like.
And again, the cable's only going to plug in one way, so you got to get it lined up. And then Jacob's got to fish down to find the other end because that's a 6-foot long cable, and it really, like I said, it doesn't need to be nearly that long. And so that's going to go in the HDMI port on the computer itself. So it doesn't go there because that's the power port. Those are only go in one way, so you might have to flip it over to get it to plug in.
Ooh. These are tiny.
Yep. There you go. All right, so now Jacob has gotten the monitor completely hooked up. So now let's see what we can do with the mouse. So remember, the mouse has a little chip that we got to stick in the USB port. So we can go ahead and put that chip into the place where it goes in the computer.
So
the mouse talks to that thing through the USB. So you're going to plug that into one of the USB ports. Remember, you might have to flip it over. Okay, so now we've got the USB plugged in for the mouse. So now our mouse is going to successfully talk to the computer. So the only thing we got left is the keyboard and power. So let's do the keyboard next. So remember, we've got to hook the power up last. So we're going to grab one of the last cables that we have sitting there, and we're going to plug one end into the keyboard and one end into the computer. And your keyboard that you have probably won't have a connector like this. It may have a wire already in the keyboard, so this isn't necessarily a step that everybody is going to be doing. But in Jacob's case, he's got a different kind of keyboard here, so we're going to use it for for that part. And then the other end, no matter what kind of keyboard you have, the other end will be a USB plug most likely, and we're going to use that to plug into the computer itself. So remember, your USB ports are square, your HDMI are flat on the top and round on the bottom part. Even the little USB or the HDMI plugs have a similar look to them as the big HDMI plug. They're just smaller. So now Jacob has successfully plugged in the keyboard, the monitor. We have power to the monitor. We have the cable going to the keyboard and the mouse hooked up. So the last thing that we need to do is plug the power in. And so in Jacob's case, that's going to be the white cable hanging over there to the side. And this is the only USB-C port on the computer. So that's, again, it'll only plug into one place. And as soon as you plug this plug in, and it's the reason we waited until we were done before we hook it up, as soon as we plug it in, the computer is going to turn on, because this computer doesn't have an on-off switch like a normal computer does. As soon as we plug it in, it's going to power on. And then you should see some lights begin to blink on the computer. It's a little hard to see here but you can see the little lights blinking there. So, and now as soon as that happens, if we flip that monitor over, we should see some things happening over there. You can see the keyboard starting to light up. Flip the monitor over so we can see what's going on, because we have to have a monitor to be able to see anything. And so if we flip this around, we can now see that we have a monitor going. So now we have a mouse and we have a keyboard, and so we can kind of slide this computer for right now out of the way. Okay, and a few things to note here. We got everything set up. We have one of the cables came unplugged. So just a few notes. One thing is the computer, because it's open and there's not a case on it, we want to be careful holding it with our hands if they're sweaty, and we definitely don't want to get the card wet. So you try to hold the card from the edges when you're working on it so that you don't short anything out on the computer itself. And then we set the monitor up over here where we could actually see it. So one of the things we're going to be doing in this process is building a case to actually put all this stuff in so that we can have a real computer that we can carry around. But as we can see, Jacob has now built his very own computer, and this is what we're going to start doing our lessons and stuff on. And while it is a small screen, if you have access to a larger screen, you can use it instead. So just like we have a monitor sitting on the desk over here, we can unplug this little screen and plug it into the big screen, and the computer will power it just the same. But we're going to be making a portable computer in this case so that we can actually carry it home and do things at home with it as well. So that is the lesson for today for actually building the computer. And then tomorrow we're going to get started actually using the computer to do some things on it. Okay, so the last thing that we need to do before we get started, or before we finish up today, is there is a screen when you first load the Raspberry Pi that's going to come up, and we need to set a few things up on the desktop. So what we're going to do is hit the next button over in the bottom right hand corner. And then this is asking for the country, the language, and the time zone. So you're just going to set that, in our case, to United States. And then the language is going to be American English. And the time zone will be your closest city that's in your time zone. In our case, we're in Georgia, so it's going to be New York. And so then we're going to hit next. And we're also going to check the two check boxes for use English language and use US keyboard. And so at this point, it's going to go out and set that stuff up. And now the last thing that it wants to know is what we want to do with our password. So we're going to enter in a password that we're going to remember so that we can log into the computer the next time that we actually boot it up. So we're going to type in a password that we'll remember, and then you're going to type it twice. So you're going to type it once, and you're going to hit the tab key on the keyboard or click in the other box, type it in again, and then hit next again. And as long as you typed it the same both times, it'll let you go to the next screen. And so now it's asking, it says that we've got a black border around it. Do we want to keep that? We're just going to hit next and it'll leave that alone. And then searching for network. And then it'll go out and try to find a wireless network for it to connect to. And so that will be something that you'll do at your house or your school to be able to get to your local network. So in Jacob's case, he knows which network, so we're going to go ahead and choose it and hit next. And then we're going to type in the password. And if he typed in the password correctly, then we'll get on the wireless network. So then the system will go out and check for the network information to make sure that it's correct. And it should allow us access to the internet at that point.
This is slow.
It is taking its time. It's making me hold this camera longer than I want to hold it. All right, so it failed in this case because Jacob typed the wrong password. Jacob likes to type keys really fast, and sometimes he makes mistakes. And I think he made a mistake again. Nope, he got it that time. All right, so the next thing it's going to say is update software. So one of the nice things about Linux is it automatically, these programmers that work so hard to make this operating system, they're constantly working. And so every day they update some of the software on the computer. And so what this is doing is asking if you want it to go ahead and update it. And we're going to go ahead and hit next. And that's going to go out and start updating the software. So once it's done with this step, you'll be ready to start poking around and using the computer. And so in the next lesson, we're going to get a little bit deeper into this computer and start learning how to use it and how the operating system is organized.